She was dragged in shackles through the dusty streets of Fort Klamath for refusing to marry a man 3 times her age until alone. Modoc warrior with eyes like winter storms cut her chains and changed the course of 2 people's destiny forever. This is the story of Luna Red Sky, the half-blood woman who chose freedom over survival, and the mysterious warrior who risked everything to give her that choice.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
The morning sun cast long shadows across the high desert plateau of southern Oregon. As the sound of iron chains echoed through the silence, each step sent dust swirling around the feet of a young woman whose defiant posture contradicted the shackles that bound her wrists. Luna Red Sky walked with her head held high despite the weight of the iron, her long black hair braided with red ribbon that had once been her mother's, the only piece of her past she'd been allowed to keep. Behind her, a small procession of tribal elders moved in solemn formation, their weathered faces etched with the weight of difficult decisions. Chief Keenpoos himself led the march, his war paint faded and his ceremonial feathers dulled by the morning mist. The sound of their moccasins against the rocky ground created a rhythm like a funeral drum, slow and inevitable. This was no celebration, no honored ceremony. This was punishment disguised as diplomacy. The year was 1873, and the Modoc people had been forced onto the Klamath Reservation after their defeat in the brutal Modoc War. Treaties written in languages they couldn't read had stripped them of their ancestral lands, their freedom, and now in Luna's case, their children's right to choose their own destiny. The reservation boundaries felt like prison walls, and within those walls, desperate men made desperate bargains. Luna's crime wasn't theft or violence or betrayal of her people. Her crime was far worse in the eyes of the tribal council. She had dared to say no. When the elders had presented her with the marriage arrangement to Howling Wolf, a Klamath war chief 20 years, her senior with 3 wives already buried and a reputation for brutality that extended far beyond the battlefield, Luna had done the unthinkable. She had looked them in the eye and refused. "I will not be sold like a horse to seal your treaties," she had declared, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "My mother didn't die giving birth to a free Modoc woman so her daughter could become a slave to your politics." Those words had sealed her fate. The elders, desperate to maintain their fragile peace with the dominant Klamath tribe that controlled the reservation, had declared her defiance a threat to the survival of their people. If she would not go willingly as a bride, she would go in chains as a lesson to any other woman who might think to defy the wisdom of desperate men. As the procession made its way toward the boundary between Modoc and Klamath territory, the weight of Luna's mixed heritage pressed down upon her like the iron shackles themselves. Her mother, Morning Star, had been a full-blood Modoc woman, renowned for her healing knowledge and her fierce independence. Her father remained a mystery that Morning Star had taken to her grave, a white trader who had passed through during the harsh winter of 1851, leaving behind only pale green eyes and a daughter who would never fully belong to either world. Luna's childhood had been marked by the constant reminder of her difference. Her skin was lighter than her cousin's, her hair had auburn highlights that gleamed copper in the sunlight, and her eyes held flecks of green that seemed to shift color with her moods. The Modoc children called her Ghost Walker because she moved between their world and the white world with an ease that both fascinated and frightened them. When Morning Star died of tuberculosis, a disease brought by the same white traders who had fathered children they would never claim 12-year-old, Luna had been raised by her grandmother, Old Woman Willow. It was Willow who taught her the traditional ways, who braided her hair with the sacred red ribbon, and who whispered the old stories when the reservation officials weren't listening. "You are not half of anything," Willow had told her during those long winter nights when the cold seemed to seep into their bones. "You are whole, Luna, whole like the moon that lights the darkness." The white blood doesn't make you less Modoc, it makes you a bridge between worlds. But bridges, Luna had learned, were often burned by both sides. The white officials saw her as just another Indian to be managed and controlled. The full-blood Modoc saw her as a reminder of their defeat, their loss of purity, their compromise, with a world that sought to erase them. And now, the tribal elders saw her as a commodity to be traded for the promise of peace. The irony wasn't lost on her that her mixed blood, which had made her an outsider her entire life, was now the very thing that made her valuable to Howling Wolf. A Modoc woman with white features would be seen as a trophy, a symbol of the Klamath tribe's dominance over their reservation neighbors. Her children would carry the blood of 3 peoples, making them living treaties that could never be broken. As they walked, Luna remembered the last conversation she'd had with her grandmother before the old woman's death the previous winter. Willow had been delirious with fever, but her words had been crystal clear. The spirits told me you would face a choice, granddaughter, between the safe path and the true path. Choose truth, even if it kills you. Better to die free than live as a lie. The sun climbed higher as they approached the trading post at the edge of Klamath territory, a ramshackle collection of wooden buildings that served as the unofficial border between the 2 tribal sections of the reservation. Luna could see the smoke rising from cooking fires, could hear the sound of voices carried on the desert wind. Soon, she would be handed over like a sack of grain, her fate sealed by men who had never asked what she wanted for her life. The trading post was owned by Samuel Garrett, a grizzled former mountain man who had married into the Klamath tribe and now served as an intermediary between the various factions on the reservation. His weathered face had seen every kind of human transaction imaginable, from horse trades to land deals to the more unsavory exchanges that desperate times demanded. Today, he would oversee the transfer of one unwilling young woman to a future she had never chosen. As they crested the final hill before the trading post, Luna caught sight of the gathering crowd below. Word had spread of her defiance and her punishment, and people had come from miles around to witness the spectacle. Some came out of curiosity, others out of sympathy, and still others out of the cruel fascination that humans have always shown for the suffering of their fellow beings. Howling Wolf was there, of course, standing beside his horse like a statue, carved from granite and malice. Even from a distance, Luna could see the satisfaction in his posture, the way he held himself like a man who had won a particularly satisfying wager. He was dressed in his finest regalia, beaded buckskin shirt, eagle feathers in his braided hair, silver ornaments that caught the morning sun like coins. He looked every inch the successful war chief, the kind of man who took what he wanted and dared anyone to try to stop him. Beside him stood his current wife, Stone Dove, a woman whose eyes held the hollow look of someone whose spirit had been systematically broken over years of marriage to a man who viewed women as possessions rather than people. She would not meet Luna's gaze as the procession approached, but Luna could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way she flinched when Howling Wolf spoke to her. This was Luna's future, to become another Stone Dove, another broken woman standing silently beside a man who measured his worth by the fear he inspired. The crowd parted as Chief Kinpus led the procession into the dusty square in front of the trading post. Luna felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, some sympathetic, others judgmental, all curious about the woman who had dared to defy tradition and was now paying the price. She could hear whispers in multiple languages: Modoc, Klamath, and the broken English that served as the common tongue of the reservation. There she is, the one who thinks she's too good for marriage. Howling Wolf will teach her proper respect. My grandmother says she's cursed by white blood. Beautiful, though. Can see why he wants her. Samuel Garrett emerged from the trading post, his leather vest stained with tobacco juice and his beard streaked with gray. He carried himself with the casual authority of a man who had spent decades mediating between cultures. though the lines around his eyes suggested he had seen too much of humanity's capacity for cruelty.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
Chief Kinpus. Garrett nodded, his voice carrying the rough edges of a man who had spent more time talking to horses than people. I see you've brought the young lady as promised. She comes willingly to honor the agreement, Kinpus replied, though the chains on Luna's wrists made his words ring hollow. The chief's face was impassive, but Luna caught the brief flicker of something in his eyes, shame perhaps, or regret. Even he knew this was wrong, but survival had a way of making cowards of good men. Howling Wolf stepped forward, his gaze running over Luna like she was livestock he was considering purchasing. When he spoke, his voice carried the casual arrogance of a man who had never been denied anything he wanted. She is smaller than I expected, he said in accented English, loud enough for the crowd to hear. But she will learn to be grateful for the honor of bearing my children. Luna's jaw clenched, but she remained silent. Speaking now would only make things worse, though she wondered if worse was even possible. The iron shackles had rubbed her wrists raw during the long walk, and she could feel blood seeping through. The torn skin. The physical pain was nothing compared to the burning humiliation of being discussed like property while dozens of people watched. Garrett pulled out a worn ledger book and began reading from it in a voice that suggested he had performed this particular ceremony too many times before. Let it be recorded that Luna Red Sky, daughter of Morning Star of the Modoc people, is hereby transferred from the custody of Chief Kinpus to the custody of Chief Howling Wolf of the Klamath people, in accordance with the marriage contract agreed upon by both tribal councils. The words hit Luna like physical blows. Transferred, custody, contract. Not one word about her consent, her feelings, or her rights as a human being. She was being traded like a horse or a rifle, her value measured not in her intelligence or her skills or her potential contributions to the world, but in her ability to produce children who would cement a political alliance. As Garrett droned on about the terms of the arrangement, Luna's mind wandered to the stories her grandmother had told her about the old days, before the white soldiers came, before the reservations, before the treaties that were written in blood and broken with impunity. In those stories, Modoc women were warriors and leaders, healers and visionaries. They chose their own husbands, raised their children according to ancient wisdom, and commanded respect through their strength and knowledge. Those stories felt like fairy tales now, as distant and unreal as the snow-capped mountains that rose beyond the reservation boundaries. The world had changed, and women like Luna were paying the price for that change with their freedom, their dignity, and their dreams. Howling Wolf reached into a leather pouch and withdrew a collection of items that represented Luna's bride price: silver coins, a bolt of red cloth, a necklace of bear claws, and a small bag of tobacco. He laid them out on a wooden crate with the ceremony of a man conducting important business, each item representing a different aspect of the transaction. "The price is fair," he declared, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "The woman will be treated according to her station as my wife." Chief Kinpus nodded solemnly and gestured for one of his warriors to unlock Luna's shackles. The iron fell away from her wrists, leaving behind raw, bleeding circles that would scar and serve as permanent reminders of this day. For a moment, Luna felt a wild surge of hope. Perhaps this was her chance to run, to fight, to do something other than submit to a fate she had never chosen. But as the crowd pressed closer, she realized that freedom was an illusion. Even without the physical chains, she was still trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Where could she run on a reservation surrounded by hostile territory? How could she survive alone in a world where a woman without male protection was seen as fair game for any man with the strength to take her? As Howling Wolf stepped forward to claim his prize, Luna closed her eyes and tried to summon the strength her grandmother had always insisted lay buried deep within her mixed blood. But all she could feel was the weight of inevitability, the crushing knowledge that sometimes the only choice was between different forms of surrender. The crowd held its collective breath as Howling Wolf reached for Luna's hand, ready to claim his new wife and seal the bargain that would bind her to a life she had never wanted. In that moment, with the desert sun beating down and the dust swirling around them, it seemed that Luna Red Sky's story was about to end before it had truly begun. But fate, as Luna would soon learn, has a way of arriving when it's least expected. Wearing the face of a stranger and carrying the promise of impossible choices, the desert wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it the scent of sage and something else, something wild and untamed that made the horses stamp nervously and the crowd murmur uneasily. Luna felt it too, a change in the air that seemed to vibrate through her bones like the distant rumble of thunder. Even Howling Wolf paused, his hand halfway to claiming her wrist, his dark eyes scanning the horizon with the instincts of a warrior who had survived too many battles to ignore the warnings of nature. From the rocky outcropping that overlooked the trading post came the sound of a single horse's hooves, but not the steady clip-clop of a pack animal or the hurried gallop of a messenger. This was something different, a rhythmic pounding that seemed to match the beating of Luna's heart, growing louder with each passing second. The crowd turned as one, their necks craning to see what approached, their conversations dying away until only the sound of that relentless drumbeat remained. When the rider finally appeared over the ridge, he seemed to materialize from the desert, itself like a mirage given form. His horse was a magnificent paint stallion, its coat a mixture of white and deep brown that seemed to shift and blend with the shadows cast by the scattered clouds above. But it was the rider himself who commanded attention, tall and lean, with long black hair that whipped behind him like a war banner, and eyes that even from a distance seemed to hold the cold fury of a winter storm. He wore no war paint, no ceremonial feathers, no symbols of rank or tribal affiliation. His clothes were simple fringed buckskin pants, a plain shirt that had been bleached nearly white by the desert sun, and boots that had seen thousands of miles of hard travel. But there was something about the way he sat his horse, the way he held his shoulders, that spoke of a man who had never bowed to anyone or anything. Samuel Garrett was the first to find his voice, though it came out as a croak. "Who in the hell is that?" Chief Kingpoo stepped forward, his weathered face creased with concern. The approaching rider was clearly Modoc, the cut of his features, the way he held himself, the very essence of his being spoke of their people. But this was no warrior from their reservation. This was someone else entirely, someone who belonged to the old ways, the time before treaties and boundaries and the crushing weight of white man's law. "He carries no flag of truce," Howling Wolf observed, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. "And he rides alone." The mysterious rider brought his horse to a stop at the edge of the crowd, and for a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the rocks and the nervous breathing of the assembled people. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had never needed to raise it to command attention. "I am Kinpuwash," he said, using the Modoc word that meant strikes the water brashly, "and I have come for the woman." The name hit the crowd like a physical blow, and Luna felt her breath catch in her throat. Kinpuwash, it was a name from the old stories, from the time before the war, before the defeat, before the slow death of reservation life. But those stories spoke of a young warrior who had vanished during the final battles, who had disappeared into the lava beds and never returned. Most believed he was dead, killed in some forgotten skirmish, or claimed by the harsh wilderness that had swallowed so many of their people. Yet here he was, very much alive and looking at Luna with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with her current predicament. His eyes were indeed like winter storms, gray-blue and unpredictable, holding depths that spoke of experiences no man should have to endure. Howling Wolf stepped forward, his own considerable presence suddenly seeming diminished by comparison. The woman belongs to me now. The contract has been sealed. Contracts written by conquered men have no power over the free, Kinpuwash replied, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. The woman was born Modoc, she will die Modoc. Everything in between is her choice to make. She has already chosen, Howling Wolf snarled, his temper finally showing. She chose to defy her elders and face the consequences. Now she will learn what it means to be a proper wife. Kinpuwash's eyes shifted to Luna, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. Is this true, sister? Have you chosen to bind yourself to this man? Luna found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I have chosen nothing. I am here because I refused to choose what others demanded of me. A smile ghosted across Kinpuwash's lips, and Luna caught a glimpse of the warrior he must have been in his youth, fierce, uncompromising, and absolutely fearless. Then you have chosen everything. You have chosen to be free. The crowd began to murmur again, some in excitement, others in fear. This was not how these transactions were supposed to go. There were rules, protocols, ways of doing things that had been established to maintain order and prevent chaos. But Kinpuwash represented something far older and more dangerous than their carefully constructed system. He represented the wild freedom that had been lost when the treaties were signed and the reservations established. Samuel Garrett stepped forward, his face red with frustration and something that might have been fear. Now see here, stranger. This here's a legal proceeding, sanctioned by both tribal councils and the Indian Agency. You got no right to interfere. I have the right of blood, Kinpuwash replied, his gaze never leaving Luna's face. I have the right of the old ways. And I have the right of a free man to defend the freedom of others. Howling Wolf's hand tightened on his knife, and Luna could see the violence building in his posture like steam in a kettle. You speak of rights, Ghostman, but you have no power here. No warriors, no weapons, no authority. You are one man against many. One man can be enough, Kinpuwash said softly, if he is the right man. As the tension in the crowd built to a breaking point, Luna found herself studying the stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to voice. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at the edges of her memory like a half-remembered dream. Then it struck her, the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, barely visible but still there, a white line against his weathered skin. I know you, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. You're the one they called Ghost Walker before the war. The one who could move through enemy territory without being seen, who could strike and vanish like smoke. Kinpuwash's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised that she had recognized him. You were just a child then. I'm surprised you remember. My grandmother told me stories, Luna replied, feeling a strange sense of connection to this man who had once been a legend among their people. She said you disappeared during the final battle at Dry Lake. Everyone thought you were dead. I was dead, Kinpuwash said simply. The man I was before the war died in those lava beds. What stands before you now is something else. Someone who learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what's worth keeping. The crowd was hanging on every word now, caught up in the drama of a legend come to life. Even Howling Wolf seemed momentarily stunned by the revelation, though his grip on his knife never loosened. Chief Kinpu stepped forward, his voice heavy with the weight of old grief. Kinpuwash, my brother, if it is truly you, where have you been all these years? Why did you not return to us when the war ended? Because the war never ended, Kinpuwash replied, his eyes moving to encompass the entire crowd. It just changed form. Instead of bullets and cavalry charges, now we die slowly of broken spirits and surrendered dreams. Instead of fighting for our land, we trade our children for the promise of survival. His words hit like arrows, finding their mark in the hearts of people who had spent years trying to justify the compromises they had made. Luna saw the pain in Chief Kinpusa's eyes, the shame in the faces of the tribal elders who had arranged her marriage. These were not evil men, but they were desperate men, and desperation had made them capable of acts they would never have contemplated in better times. "You speak of ideals," Howling Wolf said, his voice thick with scorn. "But ideals don't fill empty bellies or keep children warm in winter. The woman will come with me, and this matter will be settled according to law and custom." "Whose law?" Kinpuash asked, his voice sharp as a blade. "Whose custom?" "The law that says a woman is property, to be traded. The custom that says survival requires the sacrifice of the innocent. These are not our laws, brother. These are the laws of a world that seeks to destroy us by making us destroy ourselves." He turned to Luna, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen in any man's gaze before: respect. Not the patronizing kindness of those who saw her as a child to be protected, not the calculating interest of those who saw her as a commodity to be acquired, but the simple recognition of one free spirit acknowledging another. "I offer you choice, Luna Red Sky," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd. "Come with me, and I will take you to a place where the old ways still live. Where women are warriors and healers, not property. Where children are raised to be free, not to be traded. But know this, if you choose that path, there will be no turning back. You will be dead to this world, and it will be dead to you." Luna stared at the outstretched hand, calloused and scarred from years of hard living, and felt the weight of an impossible decision settling on her shoulders. Everything she had ever known was here: her people, her grandmother's grave, the familiar rhythms of reservation life. It was a small life, a constrained life, but it was the only life she had ever known. But what Kinpuash offered was terrifying in its completeness. He wasn't just offering her escape from an unwanted marriage. He was offering her escape from everything. A chance to step out of the world entirely and into something that might not even exist. The old ways were gone, swept away by the tide of white settlement and military conquest. How could they possibly survive in a world that had no place for them? Yet as she looked into his storm-gray eyes, Luna saw something that made her heart race with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She saw absolute certainty. This was not a man who made promises he couldn't keep or offered hopes he couldn't fulfill. If he said there was a place where the old ways still lived, then such a place existed. "Where?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Beyond the boundaries of maps," Kinpuash replied. "Beyond the reach of treaties and the authority of agents. In the high country where the eagles nest and the spirits still walk free." Howling Wolf's patience finally snapped. "Enough of this madness. The woman is mine by right of contract and tribal law. I will not be denied by the fantasies of a dead man." He lunged forward, his knife gleaming in the desert sun, but Kinpuash was ready for him. The mysterious warrior moved with the fluid grace of a man who had spent years in the wilderness, his own blade appearing in his hand as if by magic. The two men circled each other like wolves, their movements precise and deadly, while the crowd scrambled to get out of the way. But before blood could be spilled, Luna stepped between them, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Stop. I will not have men die for the right to own me. I am not a horse to be fought over or a piece of land to be claimed. I am a woman, and I will make my own choice." Both warriors froze, their knives still raised, their eyes locked on each other with the intensity of predators. But Luna's words had the power to break through their rage, reminding them that this was not ultimately about them. It was about her, and her right to determine her own fate. "Choose then," Howling Wolf said through gritted teeth. But choose quickly, before I decide that your freedom is worth less than my honor." Luna looked around at the faces surrounding her, some hostile, some sympathetic, all waiting to see what she would do. She thought of her grandmother's words about bridges between worlds, about choosing truth even if it killed her. She thought of the stories of the old days, when Modoc women rode into battle beside their men and no one dared to question their courage or their right to choose their own path. But most of all, she thought of the alternative, a life spent in submission to a man who saw her as property, bearing children who would grow up in a world that had no place for dreams or freedom, or the wild beauty of the desert that had shaped her people for generations beyond counting. "I choose," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I choose the path that leads away from here. I choose the unknown over the unacceptable. I choose freedom, even if it leads to death." She turned to Kinpuash and placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses and scars that spoke of a life lived on his own terms. His fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness, and she felt a jolt of something that might have been recognition, as if she had been waiting her entire life for this moment without knowing it. "Then we ride," Kinpuash said simply, and before anyone could react, he swept Luna up onto his horse with the ease of a man who had spent a lifetime in the saddle. The crowd erupted in shouts and curses, but the paint stallion was already moving, carrying them away from the trading post and toward the rocky hills that rose like ancient sentinels against the sky. Luna felt the wind in her hair, felt the power of the horse beneath her, felt the solid presence of the man who had appeared like a miracle to offer her the one thing she had never dared to hope for, the chance to be free. Behind them, howling, Wolf's roar of rage echoed across the desert, promising pursuit and vengeance. But Luna didn't look back. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, on the promise of a world beyond the boundaries of everything she had ever known, and felt her heart begin to beat with the rhythm of possibility. As they rode into the gathering dusk, the last rays of sunlight painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Luna Red Sky began to understand that her story was just beginning. And for the first time in her life, she was the one who would write it. The thunder of pursuing hooves echoed off the canyon walls as Kinpuash drove his paint stallion deeper into the maze of red rock formations that bordered the Klamath Reservation. Luna clung to his waist, feeling the horse's powerful muscles bunch and release beneath them, as they navigated treacherous paths that seemed barely wide enough for a man on foot, let alone a horse carrying two riders. Behind them, the angry shouts of Howling Wolf's war party grew fainter but never disappeared entirely. "How many?" Kinpuash called back to her, his voice barely audible above the wind and the clatter of hooves on stone. Luna risked a glance over her shoulder and felt her heart sink. 8 riders, maybe more. They're gaining on us. She could see Howling Wolf at the head of the pursuit, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. A man of his standing could not afford to let a woman escape his grasp, especially not in front of witnesses who would carry the tale across the reservation. His reputation as a warrior and leader depended on his ability to control what he claimed as his own, and Luna's defiance had struck at the very core of his identity. The path they were following seemed to be leading them straight into a dead end, a towering wall of red sandstone that rose hundreds of feet into the darkening sky. Luna felt panic rising in her throat as she realized they were trapped, with nowhere to go but back toward their pursuers. But Kinpuash seemed unconcerned, guiding his horse with the confidence of a man who knew exactly where he was going. At the last possible moment, he turned the stallion sharply to the left, and Luna gasped as she saw what had been hidden from view, a narrow crack in the rock face, barely wide enough for a horse and rider. Without hesitation, Kinpuash guided them into the crevice, and the world suddenly became a tunnel of stone that seemed to press in on them from all sides. The sound of their pursuers grew muffled and distant as they penetrated deeper into the Faidu rock formation. The crack twisted and turned, sometimes opening into small chambers lit by shafts of sunlight from above. sometimes narrowing so much that Luna's knees brushed against the stone walls. She began to understand why Kinpiwash had earned the name Ghost Walker. He seemed to know every hidden passage, every secret route through country that others would find impossible to navigate. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, they emerged from the tunnel into a hidden valley that took Luna's breath away. The space was perhaps a mile across, surrounded by towering cliffs that would be impossible to scale. A crystal-clear stream ran down the center of the valley, fed by a waterfall that cascaded from the heights like liquid silver. Ancient pine. Trees dotted the valley floor, their branches whispering secrets in the evening breeze. "Welcome to the first of the Forbidden Lands," Kinpiwash said, bringing his horse to a stop beside the stream. "No white man has ever seen this place, and few of our own people know it exists." As Luna slid down from the horse, her legs trembling from the harrowing ride, she found herself in a place that seemed to exist outside of time itself. The valley was beautiful beyond description, but it was more than that. It felt alive in a way that the reservation never had. Here, the spirits of their ancestors seemed to walk among the trees, and the old stories felt real and immediate rather than distant memories. Kinpiwash began unsaddling his horse with practiced efficiency, his movements economical and precise. "We'll rest here tonight," he said without looking at her. "Tomorrow, if you still wish to continue, we'll begin the real journey." "The real journey?" Luna asked, sinking down beside the stream to splash cool water on her face. "Where exactly are you taking me?" For the first time since she had met him, Kinpiwash seemed uncertain, as if he were trying to decide how much truth she could handle. He finished caring for his horse and came to sit beside her on a fallen log, his storm-colored eyes fixed on the waterfall. "There are places in this world that the white man's maps don't show," he said finally. "Places where the old ways never died because the new ways never found them. Hidden valleys, secret canyons, forgotten paths through the high country. Some are natural sanctuaries like this one. Others are more than that." Luna waited for him to continue, sensing that he was struggling with something he had never had to put into words before. "When I disappeared during the war," he went on, "I was wounded, dying. I crawled into a cave in the lava beds, expecting to bleed out and join my ancestors, but I didn't die. Instead, I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about the world." He reached into his shirt and pulled out a small object that caught the last rays of sunlight filtering down into the valley. It was a stone, but unlike any stone Luna had ever seen, it seemed to glow with an inner light, and strange symbols were carved into its surface. "This was given to me by the old ones," Kinpiwash said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The ones who came before us, who built the sacred places and knew the secrets of the earth itself. They told me that the time of hiding was ending, that the ancient ways would need champions who could walk between the old world and the new." Luna stared at the stone, feeling something deep within her responding to its presence. The symbols seemed familiar, as if she had seen them before in dreams or half-remembered visions. "What does it do?" "It opens doors," Kinpiwash replied cryptically. "Doors between worlds, between times, between what is and what could be. The old ones taught me to use it, taught me the paths that lead to the places where our people can still live free." The implications of what he was saying began to sink in, and Luna felt a mixture of wonder and terror. If what he claimed was true, then he wasn't just offering her escape from the reservation. He was offering her passage into a realm of legend and myth, a place where the old stories were not just memories, but living reality. "Why me?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Why risk everything to save one woman? Kinpiwash's eyes met hers, and she saw something in their depths that made her heart race. "Because you have the sight," he said simply. "I saw it in your eyes back at the trading post, the same gift that allows me to find the hidden paths. Your mixed blood isn't a curse, Luna, it's a bridge. The old ones need someone who can walk between the world of the spirits and the world of men, and you are one of the few who can do both. As night fell over the hidden valley, Kinpuash built a small fire using wood that seemed to burn with unusual colors, blues and greens mixed with the normal orange flames. He produced food from his saddlebags: dried meat, journey bread, and a tea made from herbs Luna didn't recognize but which tasted like spring water and starlight. "If we're going to travel the old paths together," he said as they shared the simple meal, "you need to understand what you're choosing. The world beyond. The Forbidden Lands isn't like this one. Time moves differently there. The dangers are real, but they're not the dangers you've been taught to fear. And once you cross over, you can never truly return to the life you knew." Luna considered his words as she sipped the strange tea, feeling it warm her from the inside. "Out, what kind of dangers?" "The kind that test your spirit rather than your body," Kinpuash replied. "Shape-shifters that can wear the faces of people you love. Whispering winds that try to convince you to abandon your purpose. Mirrors that show you the life you could have had if you had made different choices. The old ones don't believe in making things easy for those who seek their wisdom." He stood and walked to where his horse was grazing, returning with a leather pouch that he handed to Luna. Inside were items that seemed to pulse with their own inner light: crystals, feathers, small bones carved with intricate symbols. "These are the tools of the old ways," he explained. "Your grandmother was a healer, so you'll understand some of their uses. But they're more than medicine. They're keys to unlocking the power that sleeps within you." Luna picked up one of the crystals, feeling it warm to her touch. Images flashed through her mind: her grandmother grinding herbs by moonlight, her mother singing ancient songs over her cradle, her own hands moving with inherited skill as she worked with plants and stones that others feared to touch. "I remember," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I remember watching my grandmother work the old magic, but I thought it was just stories, traditions. The white man's world makes us forget who we are," Kinpuash said gently. "It teaches us to be ashamed of our gifts, to hide the abilities that our ancestors died to preserve. But in the hidden places, those gifts can flourish again." He guided her through her first lesson, teaching her to listen to the whispers of the stones, to feel the currents of power that flowed through the earth like underground rivers. Luna found that the knowledge came easily to her, as if she were remembering skills she had always possessed rather than learning something new. As the fire died down to embers, she realized that she was no longer the same woman who had been dragged in shackles to the trading post that morning. Something fundamental had awakened within her, something that had been dormant for so long she had forgotten it existed. Luna was awakened in the depths of the night by a sound she couldn't identify, a low humming that seemed to come from the very rocks around them. She sat up quietly, not wanting to wake Kinpuash, and looked around the camp. The fire had burned down to mere coals, casting barely enough light to see by, but the valley seemed to glow with a soft radiance that had nothing to do with moon or stars. Standing at the edge of the clearing were three figures that made Luna's breath catch in her throat. They were tall and impossibly graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer like water and eyes that held the wisdom of ages. Their hair moved as if stirred by underwater currents, and their clothes, if they could be called clothes, seemed to be woven from moonbeams and shadow. The old ones. Luna knew them instantly, though she had never seen them before except in her grandmother's most secret stories. These were the first people, the ones who had walked the earth when it was young and the barriers between worlds were thin as gossamer. The central figure stepped forward, and when it spoke, its voice was like the sound of wind through ancient trees. "Child of two worlds, you have chosen the path of testing. Are you prepared to leave behind all that you have known?" Luna found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I am prepared to try." The old one smiled, and the expression was both terrible and beautiful. Trying is not enough, young Bridgewalker. The path ahead will demand everything you are and everything you might become. You must choose with certainty, or the way will be closed to you forever. Beside her, Kinpiwash stirred and sat up, but he made no move to interrupt the conversation. Luna realized that this was something she had to face alone, a test of her own courage and commitment. "What will I become if I follow this path?" she asked. "That depends on what you are willing to sacrifice and what you are willing to become," the Old One replied. "But know this, the child who was dragged in chains this morning must die for the woman who will walk the hidden paths to be born." Luna felt the weight of the choice settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. Everything she had ever known, everyone she had ever loved, all the familiar patterns of her life, all of it would be left behind if she chose to continue. But the alternative was to return to a world that saw her as property, that would never allow her to be truly free. "I choose transformation," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I choose to become whatever I need to become to be free." The Old One nodded approvingly and reached out a hand that seemed to be made of starlight. "Then receive the first gift of the hidden paths, the ability to see the world as it truly is, not as men have convinced you it should be." When the Old One's fingers touched Luna's forehead, the world exploded into light and color and sensation beyond anything she had ever experienced. She could see the currents of power that flowed through the earth, could hear the songs that the stones sang to each other, could feel the heartbeat of every living creature within miles of where she sat. But more than that, she could see herself not as the frightened young woman who had been forced into marriage, but as something new and powerful and magnificent. She was a bridge between worlds, a keeper of ancient wisdom, a guardian of the old ways in a time when they were needed more than ever. When the vision faded and the old ones melted back into shadow and moonlight, Luna found herself changed in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her senses were sharper, her awareness expanded, her connection to the natural world deeper and more immediate than ever before. But more importantly, her fear was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. So strong it seemed to burn in her veins like liquid fire. Kinpiwash was watching her with eyes that held both pride and concern. "How do you feel?" "Different," Luna replied, flexing her fingers and marveling at the way she could now sense the life force flowing through her own body. "Stronger, more complete. The transformation has begun," he confirmed. "But it's only the first step. The real test comes when we leave this place and enter the deep paths, where the challenges are not just spiritual but physical as well." Luna stood and walked to the edge of the stream, looking at her reflection in the moonlit water. Her face was the same, but her eyes held a depth they had never possessed before, and there was a quality to her presence that spoke of hidden power barely held in check. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready to face it." Kinpiwash nodded and began packing their camp with the same quiet efficiency he had shown earlier. "Then we leave at first light. The path to the second sanctuary is longer and more dangerous than the one that brought us here, and we'll need to move quickly. Howling Wolf won't give up easily, and he has allies who know some of the old ways." As they prepared for the journey ahead, Luna felt a strange mixture of anticipation and sadness. She was leaving behind not just her old life, but her old self, the woman who had been defined by her limitations rather than her possibilities. Whatever awaited her in the hidden places beyond the forbidden lands, she would meet it as someone new, someone who had chosen transformation over surrender. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the glowing stone in Kinpiwash's hands, pulsing with light that seemed to echo the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Tomorrow they would use it to open the next door on their journey, and Luna Red Sky would take another step away from the world she had known and toward a destiny she was only beginning to understand. But tonight, for the first time in her life, she slept without fear. wrapped in the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 3 days after Luna and Kinpuash had vanished into the hidden valley, a lone figure emerged from the desert wastes beyond the Klamath Reservation. Marcus Blackwood was not like other bounty hunters who worked the frontier territories, where others relied on brute force and superior firepower. Blackwood possessed something far more dangerous: intimate knowledge of the old ways and the hidden paths that most white men dismissed as Indian superstition. Half Cherokee on his mother's side, he had been raised by his grandmother after his parents died in a cholera outbreak when he was 7. Old Woman Singing River had taught him to track not just footprints and broken twigs, but the subtle signs that most trackers never learned to see: the way birds changed their flight patterns when someone passed beneath them, the manner in which plants leaned away from paths where violence had been done, the scent of fear that lingered in the air long after its source had moved on. But Blackwood had turned those sacred teachings to profane purposes. For the past 15 years, he had made his living hunting down escaped slaves, army deserters, and Indians who had fled their reservations. His mixed blood allowed him to move between worlds, gaining the trust of tribal elders while secretly working for the very authorities who sought to destroy their way of life. He was a man without loyalty to any people, driven only by the gold that filled his pockets and the whiskey that numbed his conscience. Now, as he stood at the edge of the rocky maze where Luna and Kinpuash had disappeared, Blackwood studied the ground with eyes that missed nothing. The tracks were 3 days old, but he could read them as clearly as words on a page. 2 riders on one horse, moving fast, heading directly for what appeared to be a dead end against the canyon wall. Clever, he murmured to himself, spitting tobacco juice into the dust, but not clever enough. Unlike Howling Wolf's warriors, who had given up the pursuit after losing the trail in the rock formations, Blackwood knew exactly what he was looking for. He had heard whispers in trading posts and army forts, fragments of stories about hidden passages and secret valleys that dated back to the time before white settlement. Most men dismissed such tales as drunken rambling, but Blackwood's grandmother had told him similar stories, and he had learned never to dismiss the old knowledge entirely. It took him the better part of an hour to find the crack in the rock face, hidden in shadow and invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. As he squeezed his horse through the narrow passage, Blackwood felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. His quarry thought themselves safe in their hidden sanctuary, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the lengths to which desperate men would go for the right price. Samuel Garrett had offered him $500 to bring back the girl alive and unharmed. Howling Wolf had secretly doubled that amount with the understanding that the mysterious warrior who had stolen his intended bride should not survive the encounter. But Blackwood's real employer had offered him something far more valuable than gold: information about other hidden places, other secret paths that could make him rich beyond his wildest dreams. The U.S. Army was very interested in mapping the unknown territories, and they paid well for reliable intelligence about Indian strongholds and escape routes. If this Kinpuash character truly knew the locations of multiple hidden sanctuaries, his knowledge would be worth more than all the bounties Blackwood had ever collected combined. As Blackwood emerged into the hidden valley, he was struck despite himself by its pristine beauty. The place seemed untouched by the violence and suffering that plagued the outside world, a pocket of peace that had somehow survived the chaos of war and conquest. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember his grandmother's stories about the sacred places where the spirits dwelt, the refuges that the Creator had set aside for those who needed healing. But sentiment was a luxury that Blackwood had long since abandoned. He dismounted and began examining the ground around the valley's entrance, reading the signs that would tell him how long his quarry had remained and which direction they had gone when they left. What he found made him frown in concentration. The track showed that the 2 riders had spent the night beside the stream, but there were other signs as well: disturbances in the earth that suggested the presence of additional figures. though their footprints seemed strangely insubstantial, as if they had barely touched the ground. More troubling were the areas where the grass seemed to have been pressed down by invisible weight, and the lingering scent of something that smelled like ozone and starlight Blackwood had encountered. Such signs before, years ago when he was still young enough to listen to his grandmother's teachings with an open heart. They were the marks left by the old ones, the ancient spirits who were said to guide and test those who sought to walk the hidden paths. If such beings had indeed appeared in this valley, then his quarry was involved in something far more significant than a simple elopement. The tracker made camp beside the stream as the sun began to set, but his sleep was troubled by dreams that felt more like memories. In them, he saw himself as a young boy, sitting at his grandmother's feet while she wove baskets and spoke of the responsibility that came with the gift of sight. She had seen the potential in him, had tried to teach him to use his abilities for healing and protection rather than harm. The old ways are not tools to be used for personal gain, she had warned him. They are sacred trusts, passed down from the ancestors to help our people survive the darkness that is coming. If you turn these gifts to selfish purposes, they will consume you from within. Blackwood had dismissed her warnings as the ramblings of an old woman who couldn't accept that the world had changed. But now, surrounded by the peace of the hidden valley, he found himself wondering what his life might have been like if he had listened to her wisdom instead of pursuing the easy money that came from betraying his own people. The thought was so disturbing that he forced it from his mind, focusing instead on the task at hand. Sentiment was weakness, and weakness got you killed on the frontier. He had made his choices long ago, and there was no going back now. Blackwood was awakened before dawn by the sound of a horse's approach, though he had heard no hoofbeats during the night. He rolled silently from his bedroll, hand moving to the pistol at his hip, and peered through the pre-dawn gloom toward the valley entrance. What he saw made his blood run cold. The rider who emerged from the narrow passage was clearly Indian, but like no warrior Blackwood had ever encountered. He was ancient beyond measure. His face seamed with wrinkles that spoke of centuries rather than decades, yet he sat his horse with the straight-backed posture of a young man. His hair was white as winter snow, braided with objects that seemed to catch and hold the starlight crystals, feathers, and stones that pulsed with their own inner radiance. Most unsettling of all were his eyes, which held depths that seemed to go on forever, as if they had seen the birth and death of nations, the rise and fall of civilizations that existed before recorded history began. When the ancient writer spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Marcus Blackwood, grandson of Singing River, you have strayed far from the path your grandmother set for your feet. Blackwood's hand tightened on his pistol, though some instinct warned him that conventional weapons would be useless against this being. I don't know who you are, old man, but you'd best move along. I've got business in this valley. The ancient one smiled, and the expression was both sad and terrible. I am Standing Bear who walks between worlds, and I knew your grandmother when she was young and still believed that the sacred gifts could save our people from destruction. She would weep to see what you have become. The name hit Blackwood like a physical blow. Standing Bear was a figure from legend, one of the great medicine men who had supposedly vanished into the spirit world during the Indian Wars. According to the stories, he had been granted immortality by the Creator to serve as a guardian of the old ways during the dark times that were prophesied to come. You're supposed to be dead, Blackwood said, his voice hoarse with shock. Death is merely another country to be explored, Standing Bear replied calmly. But I have not come to speak of my fate. I have come to offer you a choice, grandson of my old friend. You can continue on your current path, serving those who would destroy everything sacred in this world. Or you can remember who you were meant to be and help preserve what little remains of the old ways. Blackwood laughed, though the sound was bitter and hollow. And what's in it for me? The army pays in gold coin, not pretty speeches about the Good old days. Standing Bear's expression grew grave. What is in it for you is the chance to reclaim your soul before it is lost forever. The girl and the warrior you seek are not ordinary people, Marcus. They are part of something larger, a plan set in motion long before your grandfather's grandfather was born. If you interfere with their mission, you will bring down curses upon yourself that will follow you through this life and into whatever comes after. The ancient medicine man reached into his shirt and withdrew an object that made Blackwood's breath catch in his throat, a crystal pendant identical to the one his grandmother had worn, the sacred stone that had been passed down through generations of medicine women in their family. This belonged to Singing River, Standing Bear said softly. She gave it to me before she died, with instructions that it should be returned to you when you were ready to remember your true purpose. The question is, are you ready? Blackwood stared at the pendant, memories flooding back with painful clarity. He remembered the day his grandmother had died, how she had called him to her bedside and tried one last time to convince him to abandon his path of betrayal and greed. He had been drunk that day, angry at the world and everyone in it, and he had said things to her that he had regretted every day since. You were always her favorite, he had snarled, speaking of his cousin who had become a respected healer among the Cherokee. Maybe if you'd spent less time filling my head with fairy tales and more time teaching me useful skills, I wouldn't have to make my living hunting down my own people. She had looked at him with such sadness in her ancient eyes, and her final words had haunted him ever since. The day will come when you will have to choose between the man you have become and the man you were born to be. I pray that when that day arrives, you will remember that love is stronger than fear, and wisdom is more valuable than gold. Now, faced with the crystal that had been her most treasured possession, Blackwood felt the weight of 15 years of wrong choices pressing down on him like a physical burden. He had told himself that he had no choice, that survival in the white man's world required compromise and moral flexibility. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He had chosen the easy path because it required no sacrifice, no risk, no faith in anything beyond his own selfish desires. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why offer me redemption now, after everything I've done? Standing Bear's eyes were compassionate but unyielding. Because the old ways teach us that no one is beyond redemption until they draw their final breath. Your grandmother saw something in you, a spark of the sacred fire that burns in all true healers. That spark has been buried under years of anger and self-hatred, but it has never been extinguished. The ancient medicine man extended the pendant toward Blackwood, who found himself reaching for it despite his reservations. The moment his fingers touched the crystal, he felt a jolt of energy that went straight to his core, awakening abilities he had spent years trying to suppress. If I take this, Blackwood said slowly, what happens to my contracts? To the people who are expecting me to deliver the girl? That is your choice to make, Standing Bear replied. But know that the path of the sacred warrior is not an easy one. It requires sacrifice, courage, and the willingness to stand against forces that most people cannot even imagine. The girl and her companion are walking toward a destiny that will determine the fate of all the hidden peoples. They will need protectors, guardians who understand both the old ways and the new. Blackwood closed his fingers around the pendant, feeling his grandmother's presence like a warm embrace. For the first time in 15 years, he felt something other than the cold emptiness that had driven him to seek oblivion in whiskey and violence. He felt hope. What do you need me to do? Standing Bear smiled, and this time the expression held genuine warmth. First, you must purify yourself of the poison you have been carrying in your heart. The hatred, the self-loathing, the anger at a world that has shown you only cruelty, all of it must be released before you can become what you were meant to be. The ancient medicine man dismounted and began gathering materials from around the valley, specific stones, certain plants, water from the sacred stream. As he worked, He spoke of the ritual that would cleanse Blackwood's spirit and prepare him for the challenges that lay ahead. Your quarry has a day's head start, but they are traveling the deep paths now, where time moves differently than in this world. If you purify yourself tonight and leave at first light, you will be able to catch up to them before they reach the place of testing. And then what? Blackwood asked, already beginning to strip off his clothes in preparation for the cleansing ceremony. Then you will do what your grandmother trained you to do, protect those who cannot protect themselves, guide those who have lost their way, and stand as a bridge between the world of the spirits and the world of men. As Standing Bear began the purification ritual, chanting in the old language while smoke from sacred herbs filled the air, Blackwood felt the weight of years of wrong choices beginning to lift from his shoulders. The process was not pleasant. He found himself reliving every betrayal, every moment of cowardice, every choice that had led him away from his true path. But with each painful memory came release, and with release came the possibility of redemption. When the ceremony was complete and the sacred fire had burned down to embers, Blackwood no longer felt like the same man who had entered the valley. The pendant around his neck pulsed with warm energy, connecting him to a power source he had forgotten existed. His senses were sharper, his awareness expanded, his connection to the natural world restored to what it had been when he was young, and still believed in the possibility of making the world a better place. "Now you are ready," Standing Bear said, though the ancient medicine man was already beginning to fade, becoming translucent like morning mist. "Remember, grandson of Singing River, the girl and the warrior are not your enemies. They are your allies in a war that has been raging since the first white man set foot on this continent. Help them reach their destination, and you will help preserve something sacred that the world desperately needs." As the first rays of dawn broke over the hidden valley, Marcus Blackwood, now truly the grandson of Singing River, once again prepared to ride after Luna and Kinpuash. But this time, he rode not as their hunter, but as their protector, carrying with him the weight of his grandmother's love and the hope of redemption that had seemed lost forever. The transformation was complete. But the real test lay ahead, in the deep paths where the old ones tested all who sought to walk between worlds. And somewhere in those mystical realms, Luna Red Sky was about to face the greatest challenge of her journey, learning to trust in her own power when everything she had ever believed about reality was stripped away. The passage through the second hidden valley had brought Luna and Kinpuash to a place that defied all earthly logic, a vast underground cavern system that stretched beyond the reach of torchlight, filled with crystalline formations that sang in harmonious frequencies when the wind passed through them. But it was not the natural beauty of the place that made Luna's skin crawl with unease. It was the mirrors, thousands upon thousands of reflective surfaces lined the cavern walls, each one showing a different version of reality. Some were made of polished obsidian, others of silver-backed glass that seemed impossibly ancient, and still others appeared to be composed of frozen water that never melted despite the warmth of the underground springs. Each mirror showed not just reflections, but possibilities, different paths Luna's life might have taken, different choices she might have made, different versions of herself that existed in worlds where history had unfolded differently. "The trial of broken mirrors," Kinpuash said softly, his voice echoing strangely in the crystalline chamber. "Every person who seeks to walk the deep paths must pass through this place. The old ones use it to test whether your commitment to your chosen path is strong enough to resist the temptation of might-have-beens." Luna approached one of the nearest mirrors, a oval of black glass set into the living rock. The reflection that looked back at her was herself, but not herself. This Luna wore the fine clothes of a white woman, her hair styled in the fashion of Boston society ladies, her skin pale from lack of sun. As she watched, the mirror Luna turned and gestured towards something beyond the frame, and Luna could see glimpses of a grand house, servants, children playing in a manicured garden, "That's the life you would have had if your father had acknowledged you," came a voice from within. The mirror, speaking with Luna's own voice, but carrying a tone of satisfied smugness. "Respectability, security, a place in proper society instead of this savage existence you've chosen." Luna's throat tightened as she stared at the vision. It was true. Her mother had told her that her unknown father was a wealthy trader, a man of influence and education. If he had claimed her as his daughter instead of abandoning Morning Star to raise their child alone, Luna's entire life would have been different. "Look closer," the mirror Luna continued, and the reflection expanded to show more details. "See how your children are educated in the finest schools. See how your husband treats you with respect because you bring social standing to his name. See how you never have to fear poverty or violence or the contempt of those who consider you less than human." For a moment, Luna felt herself wavering. The life shown in the mirror was everything she had been denied, everything she had sometimes dreamed of during the loneliest nights on the reservation. To be accepted, to belong somewhere. Without question, to never again feel the sting of being caught between worlds. Wasn't that worth any price? But then she noticed something the mirror Luna hadn't mentioned. In the grand house, there were no eagle feathers, no sage bundles, no reminders of her mother's heritage. The children in the garden were pale and spoke only English, their Modoc. Blood so diluted as to be invisible. And the woman in the mirror, for all her fine clothes and social standing, had eyes that were empty of the fire that Luna had fought so hard to kindle within herself. "You would erase everything that makes me who I am," Luna said to her reflection. "You would make me a ghost of myself, haunting rooms where I don't belong, and bearing children who will never know the sound of their ancestors' voices." The mirror Luna's expression twisted with anger. "And what do you have instead? A life of running and hiding, of being hunted like an animal, of following a man who promises you nothing but suffering and exile? You could have had everything, and you've chosen nothing." "I've chosen freedom," Luna replied firmly. "And that's not nothing, that's everything." The mirror began to crack, spider web fractures spreading across its surface until the image shattered into 1,000 fragments. But there were hundreds of other mirrors in the cavern, and each one called to her with its own version of temptation. As Luna moved deeper into the cavern, the mirrors began showing her increasingly painful alternatives. One showed her married to a kind Modoc man from her own reservation, surrounded by children who knew their heritage and spoke their grandmother's language. Another showed her as a healer living alone in the wilderness, using her gifts to help travelers and outcasts who sought her wisdom. A third showed her as a warrior woman, leading raids against the white settlers who had destroyed her people's way of life. Each reflection was seductive in its own way, offering her paths that seemed more reasonable, more achievable, more normal than the mystical journey she had chosen. But with each mirror she passed, Luna began to understand something crucial about the nature of choice itself. "They're all real, aren't they?" she asked Kinpiwash, who was standing guard at the entrance to the mirror chamber, his own gaze carefully averted from the reflective surfaces. "In a sense," he replied. "These are the lives you could have lived if different choices had been made, by you, by your parents, by the world itself. The old ones gather these possibilities like shells on a beach, using them to test whether those who seek the hidden paths truly understand what they're choosing." Luna paused before a mirror that showed perhaps the most tempting vision, yet herself and Kinpiwash living peacefully in a world where the Indian wars had never happened, where their peoples were free to roam the vast territories as they had for thousands of years. In this reflection, they were not refugees or rebels, but simply two people who had found love and built a life together, without the need for desperate flights or magical transformations. "Why show us what we can't have?" Luna asked, her voice thick with longing. "What's the purpose of torturing us with impossible dreams?" "Because," came a new voice, ancient and patient, "you must understand the true cost of the path you have. chosen before you can walk it with integrity. Luna turned to see another of the old ones materializing from the crystal formations, this one taking the form of an elderly woman whose hair seemed to be woven from moonbeams and whose dress was made from the aurora itself. Her eyes held the wisdom of ages, but also a deep sadness that spoke of countless souls who had failed this very test. "I am she who remembers all paths," the ancient being said. "It is my task to ensure that those who seek the deep ways do so, with full knowledge of what they surrender. The mirrors show you not what you have lost, but what you have chosen not to accept. The question is, can you walk away from all of it without regret?" Luna looked around at the hundreds of mirrors, each one showing her a different version of contentment, security, love, or purpose. In choosing the path of transformation, she was rejecting not just one alternative future, but all of them. She would never be the respectable white woman, never be the traditional Modoc wife, never be the simple healer or the vengeful warrior. She was choosing to become something entirely new, something that had no guarantee of happiness or success. "Will I lose the ability to love?" Luna asked, the question torn from her heart. "Will I lose my connection to other people, to the simple joys that make life worth living?" She who remembers all paths smiled, and the expression was both sad and proud. "You will lose the luxury of simplicity, child. You will carry burdens that others cannot understand, see truths that others cannot bear, and walk paths that will sometimes lead you far from the warmth of human companionship. But you will not lose your capacity for love, you will expand it. You will love not just individuals, but the sacred essence that connects all living things." The ancient woman gestured toward the mirrors, and they began to change, showing not alternative pasts but potential futures. Luna saw herself standing in places of power, healing wounds between peoples, bridging gaps between worlds, protecting the sacred from those who would destroy it. She saw herself old and wise, surrounded by students who carried the ancient knowledge into a new age. She saw herself as an ancestor, her story told around fires by people who had never met her, but whose lives had been touched by the choices she made. "This is what you choose when you choose transformation," she who remembers all paths said. "Not an easy life, but a meaningful one. Not happiness measured in personal contentment, but fulfillment measured in service to something greater than yourself." Just as Luna thought she understood the nature of the test, one final mirror appeared before her, larger than all the rest, framed in silver that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The reflection it showed was not of alternative pasts or potential futures, but of the present moment, seen from a different perspective. In this mirror, Luna saw herself through Kinpuash's eyes, and what she saw there made her gasp. She was not the strong, transformed woman she thought she had become. Instead, she was a frightened girl clinging to a fantasy, following a man she barely knew toward a destination that might not even exist. The magical abilities she thought she had, awakened, were revealed as wishful thinking. The confidence she had built as mere bravado. "This is the truth," the mirror whispered in Kinpuash's voice. "You are not chosen. You are not special. You are not the bridge between worlds or the keeper of ancient wisdom. You are just a runaway who has convinced herself that running away is the same as running towards something meaningful." Luna staggered back from the mirror as if she had been physically struck. This was her deepest fear made manifest, that her entire journey was nothing more than an elaborate self-deception, that she had chosen transformation only because she was too weak to face reality. The doubt that had always lived in the corners of her mind suddenly roared to life, threatening to consume everything she had built upon it. "Is it true?" she whispered, turning to where Kinpuash stood. But when she looked at him, she saw not the confident warrior who had rescued her, but a broken man clinging to his own fantasies of purpose and meaning. The glowing stone at his throat was revealed as nothing more than ordinary rock, and the Mystical paths they had traveled seemed suddenly like nothing more than hidden trails used by outlaws and fugitives. The final test, she who remembers all paths said softly, is to choose your truth in the face of absolute doubt. The mirrors can show you anything past, present, future, truth, lies, hope, despair. But only you can decide which reflection you will accept as real. Luna closed her eyes, trying to shut out the whispering voices of the mirrors, the alternative selves calling to her from their crystalline prisons. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she sought the core of who she was beneath all the layers of story and interpretation. What did she know with absolute certainty, beyond any possibility of self-deception? She knew the touch of her grandmother's hands as they braided her hair with the sacred red ribbon. She knew the sound of her mother's voice singing the old songs. She knew the feeling of the healing herbs responding to her touch, the sensation of power flowing through her when she had encountered the old ones. She knew the moment when she had chosen to place her hand in Kinpuwash's and ride away from everything familiar. Most importantly, she knew that even if everything else was illusion, the act of choosing itself was real. She had chosen to reject the life that others would have forced upon her. She had chosen to embrace uncertainty rather than accept unwanted certainty. She had chosen to become rather than simply to be. I choose to trust my own experience, Luna said, opening her eyes and staring directly into the mirror that showed her deepest doubts. I choose to believe that my journey has meaning because I give it meaning. I choose to accept that I may be wrong about everything except the importance of choosing for myself. The moment Luna spoke her truth, every mirror in the cavern began to crack and shatter simultaneously. The sound was like the breaking of the world itself, a crystalline symphony of destruction that seemed to go on forever. As the reflective surfaces fell away, they revealed what lay behind them, not solid rock, but vast open spaces filled with swirling mists and distant lights. The mirrors were never the test, she who remembers all paths said as her form began to fade. The test was your willingness to look beyond reflections to find the reality that exists independent of observation. You have passed Luna Red Sky. You are ready for the final challenge. As the last of the mirrors fell away, the cavern transformed around them. What had seemed like an underground chamber was revealed to be something far more extraordinary, a vast nexus point where multiple realities intersected. A place where the boundaries between worlds grew thin enough to step across. Kinpuwash approached her, his form solid and real once again, the doubt reflection fading like morning mist. How do you feel? He asked, his eyes searching her face for signs of the trauma that the trial might have inflicted. Different, Luna replied, and realized that it was true in ways she was only beginning to understand. Clearer. Like I've been looking at the world through dirty glass my entire life, and someone finally cleaned the windows. She could see the currents of power that flowed between the worlds, could sense the presence of beings and forces that existed beyond the normal range of human perception. But more than that, she could feel her own power stabilizing, no longer the wild, uncontrolled force it had been when she first encountered the old ones, but something disciplined and purposeful. The final sanctuary lies just ahead, Kinpuwash said, pointing toward a path that seemed to be made of solidified starlight. But the guardians of that place will test us both in ways that make the mirrors seem gentle by comparison. Are you ready? Luna looked back one last time at the space where the mirrors had been, where all her alternative selves had lived and died in the space of heartbeats. She felt no regret for the lives she had not chosen, no lingering doubt about the path she had accepted. For the first time since her journey began, she was completely certain of who she was and what she was meant to do. I'm ready, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. As they stepped onto the starlight path, Luna felt a presence behind them, not threatening, but protective. She turned to see Marcus Blackwood emerging from the entrance to the mirror chamber, his appearance completely transformed from the bitter bounty hunter who had pursued them. The crystal pendant at his throat glowed with the same inner light as Kinpuash's sacred stone, and his eyes held the clarity of a man who had found his true purpose. "I hope you don't mind an additional traveling companion," he said with a smile that held no trace of his former cruelty. "It seems we're all walking the same path now." Luna studied him for a moment, using her newly expanded senses to read the truth in his transformed spirit. What she found there was genuine regret for his past actions, determination to make amends, and a strength that came from accepting rather than running from his heritage. "The path is wide enough for all who choose to walk it with integrity," she said, extending her hand in welcome as the three unlikely companions began their ascent toward the final sanctuary. Luna realized that her story was no longer just about her own freedom. She had become part of something larger, a confluence of transformed souls working to preserve something sacred in a world that seemed determined to destroy everything that couldn't be measured, bought, or controlled. The greatest test still lay ahead, but for the first time since her journey began, Luna Red Sky felt ready to face whatever the old ones demanded of her. She had chosen her path, accepted its costs, and found allies who shared her commitment to walking between worlds. Whatever came next, she would meet it not as a frightened runaway, but as a woman who had claimed her power, and her purpose through the simple act of refusing to accept any destiny, but the one she chose for herself. The Starlight Path led them through dimensions that had no names in any human language, past landscapes that defied the laws of physics, and through skies where multiple moons danced in patterns that told stories older than memory. But nothing could have prepared Luna, Kinpuash, and Marcus for what awaited them at the path's end, a city that existed in the spaces between heartbeats, built from crystallized time and held together by the collective dreams of every people who had ever sought refuge from a world gone mad. The architecture defied comprehension. Towers spiraled impossibly upward, their surfaces shifting between translucent crystal and solid silver, depending on the angle of observation. Bridges made of hardened light connected floating platforms, where beings from across all of creation moved with purpose and grace. Gardens bloomed with flowers that sang in harmonies that could heal wounded souls, while fountains flowed not with water but with liquid starlight that granted visions to those who dared to drink. "The Eternal City," Kinpuash whispered, his voice filled with awe despite his years of walking the hidden paths. "I have heard stories, but I never believed it was real." Luna found herself overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of what she was seeing. This was not just a hidden sanctuary, this was the nexus point of all hidden sanctuaries, the place where refugees from every conquered civilization had found shelter when their worlds were destroyed. She could see them now, moving through the crystal streets, Aztec priests carrying scrolls of forbidden knowledge, Celtic druids tending groves that grew in defiance of winter, Aboriginal dreamwalkers painting new realities onto the walls of eternity. But it was the figure approaching them that commanded their attention above all else. She appeared human at first glance, but as she drew nearer, the illusion began to fade. Her skin held the deep bronze of someone who had been kissed by 1,000 different suns. Her hair flowed like liquid midnight, shot through with threads of silver starlight, and her eyes held depths that spoke of having witnessed the birth and death of galaxies. "Welcome, travelers from the wounded world," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in their very bones. "I am Tecumseh's daughter, though I was known by many names in the time before the Great Forgetting. I serve as speaker for the Council of Eternities, and it is my task to determine whether you are ready for the final truth." Marcus stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving to the crystal pendant at his throat. "What truth? We've passed your tests, faced your trials. What more do you want from us?" Tecumseh's daughter smiled, and the expression held both infinite compassion and terrible sadness. "The truth about why this city exists, warrior who was lost and is now found." The truth about what becomes of those who choose transformation over surrender. The truth about the price that must be paid to preserve the sacred in a world that has forgotten how to see it. She gestured toward the center of the impossible city, where a structure rose that dwarfed even the crystalline towers around it. It appeared to be a vast amphitheater, but one built on a scale that could accommodate beings from across all dimensions of existence. Even from a distance, they could see that it was filled with figures of every description, some human, some clearly not, all united by an aura of power and purpose that made the air itself shimmer with possibility. The Council of Eternities has been waiting for you, Luna Red Sky. Tecumseh's daughter continued, her gaze fixing on Luna with intensity that felt like being examined by the sun itself. For you and for all those who, like you, have chosen to become bridges between worlds. The time of hiding is ending, and the final choice must be made. As they made their way through the crystalline streets toward the great amphitheater, Luna began to understand the true scope of what she had stumbled into. This was not just about her personal freedom or even the survival of her people. This was about the continuation of something that had existed since the first human being looked up at the stars and wondered if there was more to existence than the daily struggle for survival. The beings they passed in the streets were all refugees in their own way, survivors of cultural genocides, keepers of forbidden knowledge, guardians of sacred truths that their original worlds had tried to destroy. But they were also something more than refugees. They had been transformed by their exile, made into something new and powerful by their refusal to let the sacred die with their homelands. A man who appeared to be made of living jade approached them, his face bearing the features of ancient China, but his eyes holding the wisdom of ages. I was the last keeper of the dragon scrolls when the Emperor ordered all magical knowledge destroyed, he said to Luna. I chose exile over compliance, transformation over death. Now I guard the true histories of 100 civilizations. An elderly woman whose skin seemed to be composed of shifting patterns of light and shadow joined their small procession. I was a dream singer among the people of the northern ice, until the missionaries came and declared our visions to be devil worship. Rather than let the old songs die, I walked between dreams and brought them here, where they could survive until the world was ready to hear them again. With each story Luna heard, she began to understand the magnitude of what was being offered to her. These were not people who had simply escaped their circumstances. They were people who had chosen to become living repositories of everything their cultures had valued most deeply. They had accepted transformation not just as personal salvation, but as a way of preserving the sacred knowledge of their peoples for a future generation that might be wise enough to appreciate it. But there was a cost to such transformation, and Luna could see it in the eyes of every being they passed. They were no longer fully human, no longer entirely connected to the world they had left behind. They existed in a space between spaces, forever watching over treasures that might never be reclaimed, forever guarding doors that might never be opened. Is this what I'm choosing? Luna asked Kinpiwash as they climbed the crystal steps toward the amphitheater. To become a curator of dead dreams? Kinpiwash's expression was thoughtful as he considered her question. Not dead dreams, he said finally. Sleeping dreams. Dreams that wait for the right moment to wake up and change the world again. As they reached the entrance to the great amphitheater, Tecumseh's daughter paused and turned to face them. Before you enter the council chamber, you must understand what you will be asked to choose. The old ones have been watching the world of men for centuries, waiting for the moment when intervention becomes necessary. That moment has arrived. She gestured toward the wounded world they had left behind, and Luna could see it now as if looking through a window, the reservations where her people slowly died of despair, the cities where immigrants struggled to maintain their traditions in the face of forced assimilation, the forests and sacred sites being destroyed in the name of progress and profit. The great forgetting is nearly complete, Tecumseh's daughter continued. Soon, There will be no one left who remembers the old ways, no one who can hear the voices of the spirits, no one who understands that all life is connected by invisible threads of power and purpose. When that forgetting is complete, the world will become a place where only material things have value, where the sacred is reduced to superstition, where the mystery and magic that make existence meaningful are lost forever. Luna felt the weight of countless generations pressing down upon her shoulders. And what can we do to stop it? That, Tecumseh's daughter said with a smile that held both hope and terrible responsibility, is what the council will ask you to decide. The interior of the great amphitheater defied all architectural logic. It seemed to expand as they entered, accommodating not just the hundreds of beings already gathered there, but the infinite possibilities that their presence represented. The council members were arranged in concentric circles with the most ancient and powerful beings occupying the inner rings, while newer arrivals like Luna found places in the outer reaches. At the very center of the amphitheater stood a figure that made Luna's breath catch in her throat. It was clearly one of the old ones, but older and more powerful than any she had encountered before. Its form shifted constantly, sometimes appearing as an ancient Native American elder, sometimes as a Celtic druid, sometimes as an Aboriginal dreamwalker, sometimes as something that had no human characteristics at all. "I am the first speaker," the entity said, its voice somehow reaching every corner of the vast space without seeming to be raised above a whisper. "I have called this council because the time of decision has arrived. For too long, we have preserved the sacred ways in isolation, hiding our wisdom in sanctuaries that grow ever more distant from the world that needs them. But isolation is no longer sustainable." The first speaker gestured, and the air above the council filled with images, cities choking on their own pollution, forests stripped bare by industrial greed, indigenous people struggling to maintain their identities in the face of cultural extinction, children growing up without any connection to the natural world that had shaped their ancestors for millennia. "The world is dying," the first speaker continued, "not just physically but spiritually. The great forgetting has progressed to the point where most humans no longer believe in anything they cannot measure or buy. They have convinced themselves that consciousness is nothing more than electrical activity in the brain, that love is just chemical reactions, that the universe is a vast machine with no purpose or meaning." Luna found herself leaning forward, captivated despite the terror of what she was hearing. But surely some people still remember. There must be others who preserve the old ways. "There are," acknowledged a council member who appeared to be composed entirely of swirling autumn leaves. "But they are scattered, isolated, often unaware of each other's existence. They practice their traditions in secret, afraid of ridicule or persecution. They have become guardians of museums rather than keepers of living wisdom." Another council member, this one resembling a living constellation, took up the thread. "The Kindu question before us is whether to continue our policy of preservation through separation, or to risk everything by attempting to reawaken the world to the truths it has forgotten. And what would that involve?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the authority of one who had walked both paths, that of betrayal and that of redemption. The first speaker's form solidified into that of an ancient Native American elder, his eyes holding depths that seemed to encompass all of human history. "It would involve sending some of our number back into the wounded world, not as refugees or observers, but as teachers and healers. They would work to re-establish the connections that have been severed, to remind humanity that the sacred is not separate from the everyday, but woven into the very fabric of existence." The implications of what was being proposed began to sink in, and Luna felt her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and terror. "You're talking about revealing yourselves to a world that has spent centuries trying to forget you exist." "More than that," the first speaker replied. "We are talking about transforming a world that has forgotten how to transform itself. It would require those who accept this mission to give up the safety of the hidden sanctuaries, to walk once again among people who might reject or even persecute them. But it would also offer the possibility of healing wounds that have festered for generations. As the full scope of what the council was proposing became clear, Luna realized that her personal journey from unwilling bride to transformed bridge walker had been preparation for this moment. Everything she had experienced, every test she had passed, every choice she had made, had been leading to this ultimate decision. Why me? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Why not one of the more experienced members of the council, someone who has been walking the hidden paths for centuries? Tecumseh's daughter stood and addressed the assembly, her voice carrying clearly through the crystalline air. Because transformation cannot be taught by those who completed it long ago. It must be demonstrated by those who are still in the process of becoming. Luna Red Sky carries within her the fresh memory of what it means to be trapped by others' expectations, the immediate knowledge of what it costs to choose freedom over security. She can speak to those who are still caught in the web of the great forgetting, because she was recently caught in that web herself. The first speaker nodded approvingly. Moreover, her mixed heritage makes her a natural bridge between worlds. She can speak to both the conquered and the conqueror, can move between indigenous communities and the dominant culture with equal authenticity. She embodies the truth that transformation is possible for anyone willing to embrace the full complexity of their heritage. Luna looked around the vast amphitheater at the hundreds of beings who had chosen exile over assimilation, transformation, over surrender. Each of them had given up everything familiar to preserve something sacred, and now they were asking her to take that sacred knowledge back into a world that had rejected it. What about the others? She asked, gesturing toward Kimpuwash and Marcus. What role would they play in this mission? I would serve as your guide and protector, Kimpuwash said immediately. I have walked between worlds longer than you, and I know the dangers that await those who try to bridge them. If you choose to accept this calling, I will help you navigate the treacherous currents between the sacred and the mundane. Marcus stepped forward, his transformation from hunter to guardian complete. And I would serve as proof that redemption is possible even for those who have betrayed their deepest values. My story might reach people who would dismiss yours as impossible or irrelevant. Together, we could demonstrate that transformation is not just for the chosen few, but for anyone willing to do the hard work of becoming who they were meant to be. The first speaker raised a hand, and the entire amphitheater fell silent. The choice is yours, Luna Red Sky. You can remain here in the Eternal City, where you will be safe and honored, where you can study the ancient wisdom and add your own insights to our collective knowledge. Or you can return to the wounded world as an agent of transformation, knowing that the path will be difficult and dangerous with no guarantee of success. Luna closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, seeking the same clarity that had carried her through the trial of broken mirrors. In the silence behind her eyelids, she could hear the voices of her ancestors, her grandmother urging her to choose truth over comfort, her mother singing the old songs that had nearly been lost, the spirits of the old ones whispering encouragement and warning in equal measure. When she opened her eyes, her decision was clear. I didn't survive chains and trials and transformation just to hide in paradise, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. If there's a chance to heal the wounds between worlds, to help people remember what they've forgotten about the sacred nature of existence, then that's a risk worth taking. The council erupted in sounds that might have been applause if they had come from human throats, but which instead created a harmony of approval that seemed to make the crystal walls sing. The first speaker smiled, and for a moment Luna could see in that ancient face an echo of every teacher who had ever inspired a student to reach beyond their limitations. Then it is decided, the first speaker said. You will return to the world as the first of the new bridge walkers, carrying with you the wisdom of the hidden paths and the responsibility of awakening others to possibilities they have forgotten how to see. The eternal city will always be here for you if you need sanctuary, but your work lies in the world of change and challenge. As Luna prepared to leave the impossible city and return to a world that had tried to chain her spirit, she realized that her story was not ending but beginning. She had started this journey as a woman fleeing an unwanted fate, but she was completing it as something entirely new, a guardian of ancient wisdom, a teacher of transformation, a living bridge between the world that was and the world that could be. The girl who had been dragged in shackles for refusing marriage was gone forever. In her place stood Luna Red Sky, the bridge walker, ready to help others find their own paths from bondage to freedom, from despair to hope, from the great forgetting to the great remembering that would transform not just individuals, but the entire world. Her real adventure was just beginning.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.